My God, how can this be happening now? David Halbridge's voice echoed down the hall like thunder, bouncing off glass walls on the 45th floor of Halbridge Global. His assistant, Rebecca, paced frantically behind him, phone glued to her ear. In less than 15 minutes, a delegation from China would sit down to finalize a $200 million deal, and their translator had just canceled. 12 years building a reputation, and it was unraveling before his eyes. From my spot in the corner, holding a cleaning cloth and lemon polish, I watched silently. I was supposed to blend into the marble, to vanish like dust when they passed by. For 12 long years, I had mastered being invisible. Just Evelyn. The old janitor nobody saw, but as panic filled the room, something inside me stirred, because what no one knew, not David, not Rebecca, not the executives nervously glancing at their watches, was that Mandarin wasn't just a language for me. It was my heart, my memory, my son's voice. I stepped forward softly, and before I could reconsider, I spoke clearly, calmly, into the storm. "Excuse me, Mr. Halbridge, but I speak fluent Mandarin." Every face turned toward me, stunned. Rebecca's lips curled into a smirk that dripped disbelief, but David stared as if truly seeing me for the first time. They saw an aging woman in a janitor's uniform. They saw faded shoes and silver hair, but what they didn't see was the story beneath, the quiet strength born of loss, the language learned through love, and a legacy I had yet to reveal. Because they had spent so many years looking past me, they never imagined the power hidden in plain sight. And as I stepped into that boardroom, heart racing, I knew I was about to change everything. Not just for myself, but for every woman who's ever been ignored, silenced, or underestimated. Yet I couldn't possibly imagine how far Rebecca would go to stop me, or how deeply the truth I carried would shake the foundations of Halbridge Global. They never said good morning, not once in the last 12 years. The best I got was, "Make sure the elevators shine before 8, and I did. Quietly, I polished floors that reflected the shoes of men who never looked down. At Halbridge Global, I was invisible, just an old cleaning lady in orthopedic shoes, and a name tag too faded to read. But what no one knew was, I spoke fluent Mandarin, not because of any degree, but because of something much deeper, something no one there would ever guess. That morning, I was wiping the lobby glass when I heard the shouting from the top floor. Mr. David Halbridge, the CEO himself, pacing in a panic. The translator for the Chinese delegation had canceled last minute, and in less than 15 minutes, their executives would be stepping into the boardroom to finalize a contract worth $200 million. I kept my head down, cloth in hand, but inside my chest tightened, because Mandarin wasn't just a language to me. It was the last thread that connected me to someone I loved and lost. I spoke Mandarin with my son June every night. He wasn't mine by blood, but I raised him since he was 6 months old. I adopted him from a tiny orphanage in Sichuan after a church mission trip. People said I was too old to raise a baby alone. I said love didn't retire. Jun loved when I whispered Chinese poems before bed. And after he passed, 19 years old, one rainy night, a driver who never saw the red light, I kept speaking Mandarin. To his dog, Bao, a scruffy little Shih Tzu who still follows me from room to room like Jun used to. I remember standing there in the lobby, cloth soaked in vinegar and lemon oil, watching executives scramble. Mr. Halbridge clutched his temples like the world was ending. His assistant, Rebecca, was barking orders into 3 phones at once. "No one's available. We're going to lose this deal," she shouted. I felt it deep in my stomach, an ache I hadn't felt in years. I didn't want to be a hero. I just didn't want June's language to die in silence, not when it could save something this big. So I stepped forward. My heart pounded like it did when I signed June's adoption papers. I approached Rebecca and said, "I can help. I speak Mandarin." She didn't even look at me, just gave a short laugh and waved me off like I was trying to sell cookies. "Not now, Evelyn. We need someone professional." She didn't say someone like you, but she didn't have to. It was in the way she smirked, like I was a toddler interrupting grown-ups. I took a deep breath. I had been ignored before, but something inside me had changed. And then Mr. Halbridge looked at me, really looked at me, and I said it without hesitation in perfect Mandarin. Wo ke yi bang mang? I can help. He froze. For the first time, I saw surprise in his eyes, maybe even hope. But just as he opened his mouth to reply, Rebecca stepped forward with something cruel in her voice, something that would try to bury me again. But this time, I was ready to rise. I stood there in silence after speaking Mandarin, my words still echoing in the air like a bell no one expected to ring. Mr. Halbridge stared at me, his mouth slightly open, as if he was trying to connect the dots between my mop, my gray bun, and the language I just spoke fluently. Then Rebecca stepped between us. Sir, that's Evelyn. She cleans the break room microwaves. We need a professional interpreter. Someone qualified. Her voice sliced through me sharper than any blade. I've heard that tone before. In grocery stores, at the bank, even at church potlucks. That tone that says, "You're not one of us." But I wasn't 16 anymore. I wasn't the scared woman who once let a social worker talk her out of adopting Jun because of my age. I just looked at Rebecca and said quietly, Mandarin isn't something I picked up last week. I learned it because my son was Chinese. I loved him in 2 languages. She blinked, caught off guard, but not moved. Mr. Halbridge still hadn't said a word. The hallway felt frozen in time. For a moment, I thought I had pushed too far, stepped out of the role they expected me to play. But then I remembered Jun's little notebook, the one where he wrote down every character I taught him. I still read it sometimes when Bao curls up beside me. I wasn't just fighting for respect. I was fighting for the language that kept my son alive in my heart. Rebecca tried again. Sir, we don't even know if she's telling the truth. And that's when I did something I didn't plan. I turned to the assistant from the Chinese delegation, who had just arrived, and greeted him directly, not in English, not with hesitation. I looked him in the eye and said, Nin hao. 我很荣幸见到您. He smiled immediately and bowed slightly, responding in kind. The tension cracked like ice under sunlight. The other assistants looked at each other, surprised. One even whispered, She's good. But Rebecca wasn't done. She crossed her arms and said with a half laugh, So now we're letting janitors run negotiations? I stood straighter. No, I said softly. You're letting a mother speak the only language she has left to honor her child. The room went quiet, but in Rebecca's eyes, I saw something shift. Not respect. Resentment. That look would come back to haunt me. I didn't know it yet, but that moment planted a seed. A small one that would grow into something much bigger and much darker. Because while I stepped into that boardroom feeling finally seen, someone else had already decided I didn't belong, and her plan to make sure I'd never be respected had just begun. They didn't have time to debate it any longer. The Chinese delegation had arrived, and the conference room filled with polite tension. Mr. Halbridge looked at me, then at his reflection in the glass wall, as if checking who he really was before making a decision. All right, he said almost under his breath. Evelyn, come with me. I walked in behind him, still wearing my cleaning uniform and sensible shoes. No title, no makeup, just memory, grief, and the voice of my son etched into every word I would speak. The executives sat stiffly, their translators whispering updates into their ears, until they noticed me. One of them, a woman with silver pins in her hair, looked at me curiously. I bowed respectfully and opened with the formal Mandarin greeting Jun taught me when he was 10. I had practiced it for years in our kitchen, just in case he ever met his birth relatives. My voice didn't shake. Zun Jing de Kuren Men. Huan Ying Guanglin Habu Li Chi Ji Tuan. Their eyes widened. Respect changed shape right in front of me. One of the older executives chuckled softly and responded with a proverb. I smiled. I knew that one. A river is widest where it is most patient. I translated not just word for word, but soul for soul. I added small cultural clarifications where needed. Just like I used to explain idioms to Jun during dinner. I could feel them relaxing, trusting, Every word I said I gave from the place in me where motherhood and mourning lived side by side. The room was still, listening. Everything was going smoothly, until Rebecca opened her mouth. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said loudly, "but I think they should know who Evelyn really is." She walked to the head of the table and added, "She's not a professional interpreter. She's a janitor." Her voice sounded sweet, the kind of sweet that rots teeth. She looked so pleased with herself, like she had just fixed a problem. But what she had actually done was break something sacred. The air changed instantly. One of the Chinese executives whispered to another. A younger man gave me a second glance, not with judgment, but with uncertainty. In many parts of Asia, respect for hierarchy is everything. By exposing my role, Rebecca hadn't just embarrassed me. She had damaged the delicate fabric of mutual trust I had worked so hard to build in less than 30 minutes. I kept translating, but I felt the shift. I felt Jun slipping further away in the silence between words. After the meeting, no one said much. Mr. Halbridge looked disturbed, like someone had let a storm into his private museum. I stepped outside into the hallway and leaned against the wall, breathing slowly. Bao's little sweater was still tucked in my bag. Jun's old scarf cut down to size. I held it in my hands and whispered, "I did the best I could, baby." But something told me this wasn't over. Not yet, because what Rebecca didn't know was that I had been quietly watching her for years. The next morning I came in early. Like always, no one spoke to me. I wasn't on the list of people to greet, or the kind of face you nod to in the hallway. But that day, the silence was thicker, heavier. The people who once ignored me now avoided me, like I had committed a crime just by speaking. Even Mr. Halbridge barely met my eyes when I passed him by. I understood. In their world, I had broken an invisible rule. I didn't stay in my place. I returned to mopping the elevator floors, pretending not to hear the whispers. She embarrassed the company. Why didn't they vet her? What if she got something wrong? No one mentioned that the deal hadn't fallen through. No one cared that the Chinese delegation had left with smiles and bowed goodbyes. All they saw was a woman in old sneakers who dared to speak a language no one expected her to know. Bao would have licked their shoes. He forgives quicker than I do. At lunch, I sat in the basement break room with my thermos of lentil soup. I opened the lid, and the smell reminded me of John. He used to say it smelled like hugs. I smiled a little, but my eyes burned. That room hadn't changed in 10 years. Same peeling posters, same flickering light. But I had changed. I wasn't sure how, but something inside me felt awake. Rebecca had tried to shrink me back down to nothing, and somehow, she'd only made me bigger in my own eyes. Still, the shame stuck to me like wet fabric. I overheard Rebecca joking with the marketing team. Maybe we should start hiring janitors as negotiators. It'd be cheaper. They laughed. And for a second, I almost said something. But I didn't, because deep down, I knew something she didn't. She had made a mistake, not just by underestimating me, but by letting her cruelty show in front of the wrong people, people who had more power than she realized. I started remembering things, times I had walked into rooms too early and heard things I wasn't meant to hear, emails I'd seen left open on printers, snippets of conversations, names, figures, jokes that weren't really jokes. I hadn't thought much of it before, but now I saw a pattern, a long, ugly thread of manipulation, lies, and something darker, something that didn't just hurt me, but hurt others, quietly, efficiently, behind closed doors. That night, after feeding Bao his soft chicken and rice, I sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and opened a folder I hadn't touched in over 2 years. Inside were notes, screenshots, and names. 63 pages of quiet witnessing. I had never meant to use them, but now, maybe John had been right when he used to call me his little detective, because for the first time in a long while, I had a reason to speak again. That folder had lived under my bed for over 2 years, collecting more dust than attention. It began as a notebook John gave me, a gift on my birthday when he was 15. So you can write things down when they don't feel right, he said. At first, it was just scribbles, dates, times, offhand remarks. Then I started noticing patterns. Rebecca's name came up more than once. So did strange internal emails and inconsistencies in numbers printed and reprinted. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just paying attention. Some people knit. Some people do crossword puzzles. I document things. Quietly. Thoroughly. Especially when no one notices me in the room. There's a power in invisibility, if you learn how to use it. I had 63 pages by now, each one marked by date, context, and evidence. Nothing dramatic, just truths hidden in the soft folds of daily life. Bao sat under the table as I flipped through them, resting his chin on my slipper like he always does when I stay up late thinking. I didn't tell anyone. Not even the kind receptionist on floor 4 who always shared her peach candies with me. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even anger. It was clarity. A kind of peace that comes when you know you're no longer trapped in someone else's game. Have you ever gone through something like this? If so, I'd love to know. Leave a comment if any part of this story reminds you of your own. I read every single one. I wasn't planning to bring Rebecca down. I was planning to lift myself up in the only way I knew how, by letting the truth speak louder than anything I could ever shout. Over the next week, I kept working. Quietly, respectfully, but I paid attention even more. I saw how Rebecca smiled at certain people and ignored others. I noticed how she steered conversations, controlled access, even manipulated Mr. Halbridge's schedule. I started copying key logs into my notebook, just in case. I didn't know what I was building exactly, only that the foundation felt stronger every time I added a page. One afternoon, I passed by the glass conference room again. My reflection looked tired, but sharper. I remembered something John used to say whenever I helped him with homework. Mom, you don't just see things, you see through them. That stayed with me, because now I wasn't just observing. I was preparing. I didn't need revenge. I needed restoration, not for me, but for all the times women like me had been dismissed and discarded. Then, just when I thought I was the only one watching, something unexpected happened. A folded card was slipped under my locker door. No name, no markings, just a note inside that read, "We saw how you handled the meeting. We'd like to speak." Off the record. And it was signed not by anyone from Halbridge, but by someone from the Chinese delegation. I stared at that little card for a long time before opening it. It was thick, embossed, with edges that felt too elegant for a janitor's hands. Inside, the message was simple, but it sent my heart straight into my throat. "We saw how you handled the meeting. We'd like to speak. Off the record." It was signed by someone I remembered clearly, Ms. Lisa Wong, the vice president who sat quietly during the negotiation, watching everything with calm intelligence. My hands shook slightly as I folded the card back up. That night, Bao refused to leave my lap. He could sense when something stirred inside me. I made myself a cup of ginger tea and sat by the window, watching the L trains pass through the dark. I hadn't felt this kind of nervousness since June was called to give a speech at his school, and forgot half the words. But this wasn't school. This was something else. Something big. Something that felt like the edge of a page I wasn't supposed to turn, but couldn't resist. The meeting was set for 3 days later in a private tea room just outside Chinatown. I wore my best cardigan and a blouse June once picked out for me at a thrift shop. Soft pink with a pearl collar. Lisa Wong greeted me personally, along with Mr. Chun, the senior liaison from the delegation. "Evelyn," she said warmly, "we don't care about resumes. We care about character, and yours spoke louder than anyone's title in that room." I didn't know whether to smile or cry, so I did both, quietly. They offered me something I didn't expect. Not just a job, a partnership, a role on their international communications team, remote, flexible hours, and a salary 5 times what I made scrubbing toilets. I nearly laughed out loud. "I'm 67, I said. Lisa smiled. "And more qualified than most 30-year-olds we've interviewed." Then she leaned in and added something that changed everything. "We also believe something's wrong inside Halbridge, and we think you already know what it is." I didn't answer right away. I took a sip of tea and stared at the steam rising from the cup. In that moment, I thought of Jun's tiny hands on the dining table, forming Mandarin characters with crayons. I thought of Bao, and how he always sleeps by the door until I return. I thought of all the years I was invisible, and how maybe that was the very thing that made me powerful now. I don't want revenge, I said softly, but I do want the truth to come out. Lisa nodded once. That's all we want too. I left that meeting with a small red envelope in my pocket. No money inside, just a folded paper with 2 words. Trust us. But trust is a delicate thing. And when I returned to Halbridge the next morning, something told me I was being watched. Not by the cameras, not by Mr. Halbridge, but by someone whose smile never reached her eyes, and who had no intention of letting me walk away clean. The summons came 2 days later, a sudden emergency meeting, scheduled for 8:30 sharp. No agenda, no explanation, just a message from Rebecca that said, "Please be prompt." I knew the tone. It was the same one she used when she wanted to look generous in front of others. That polished cruelty, hidden beneath professionalism. I brushed Bao before leaving. He nudged his nose under my wrist and looked up at me like he knew. Be strong, Mom. The room was unusually full. Department heads, assistants, even Mr. Halbridge himself sitting at the end of the table like a man trying to hold on to the last piece of good news. Rebecca stood by the whiteboard, smiling that empty smile. "Before we begin," she said, "I need to address something critical. There's been a breach of protocol, one that compromised trust with our international partners." Her eyes flicked toward me. "Some people here stepped out of line." I didn't flinch. I had the folder in my bag. 63 pages, neatly organized. Every page a quiet scream, finally ready to be heard. "Are you accusing me of misconduct?" I asked calmly. "Because if so, I'd like the opportunity to speak." Rebecca laughed, soft and smug. "I'm just saying, maybe we placed trust in someone who wasn't prepared for it. Someone who, let's be honest, wasn't even part of the team." Mr. Halbridge opened his mouth, then closed it again. Frozen. Typical. So I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shake. I reached into my bag and placed the folder on the table. "If we're talking about trust," I said, "then we should all have the same information." I opened it and began laying out the documents. Email threads, budget irregularities, a pattern of manipulated reports, screenshots of messages. Every page was dated, annotated, verified. Not one person in that room made a sound, except for Rebecca, whose smile finally disappeared. Mr. Halbridge leaned forward, reading silently. His fingers trembled slightly when he got to the expense sheets. Is this real?" he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Lisa Wong had confirmed everything quietly in the background. All I did was observe, and remember, and protect the truth until it had a place to live. Rebecca stepped back. "This is a setup," she whispered, but the room already knew. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just stands. The meeting ended not with applause, not with shouting, but with quiet, orderly justice. Rebecca was escorted out, her keycard deactivated before she reached the elevator. I returned to the janitor's closet, sat on the little stool beside the mop sink, and took a deep breath. Bao's scarf was still tucked in my bag, warm and familiar. But something told me I wouldn't be returning to this closet again, not after what Mr. Halbridge would say to me next. I didn't see Mr. Halbridge again until 2 days later. He called me into his office personally, and for the first time, he opened the door himself. "Please," he said, gesturing toward the leather chair. "Sit." I almost laughed. That chair had never been offered to me, not even when I'd scrubbed the edge of his glass wall with vinegar and steel wool. I sat carefully, like the moment might disappear if I moved too fast. He looked tired, but also relieved. He didn't speak in corporate jargon, no legal disclaimers. Just a sentence I never thought I'd hear. "You saved this company." I blinked, unsure what to do with those words. "I didn't mean to," I said softly. I just couldn't let the lie grow any bigger. He nodded slowly. "We'd like to offer you something formal. A new position, Director of Cultural and International Relations. You've already done the work, more thoroughly than most. My hand covered my mouth for a moment. I felt June's name rising in my throat. Later that day, they gave me a new badge. No mop, no faded edges. Just my name printed clean and strong. Evelyn Mayfield, Director. Bao sniffed it curiously when I brought it home. I held it up to the light and whispered, "Look, baby, Mama did something." He wagged his tail once and trotted back to his blanket. I didn't frame the badge. I tucked it in June's old memory box, right next to his favorite pencil, and the broken glasses he refused to throw away. The salary was 5 times what I had earned before, just like Lisa had said, but it wasn't the money that moved me. It was the space, the way people began to pause when I entered a room, the way I could speak now, without being interrupted. I didn't walk faster. I didn't dress fancier. I was still Evelyn. Still wore the same shoes, but inside, I carried myself taller. Not for attention, but for Jun. For every ignored woman who had more to give than anyone dared to imagine. I used my first paycheck to pay off the last of June's student loan. A loan I had been covering slowly, quietly, since the day he passed. I donated the rest to a scholarship fund that no longer existed, but would now. I called it the Jun Mayfield Fellowship, for cultural understanding. The name made the clerk at the non-profit office pause. "He was your son?" she asked. "He still is," I said, "every day." And just when I thought that would be the highlight of my year, something even more unexpected happened. A young intern from Human Resources knocked on my office door with wide eyes and shaky hands. "Ms. Mayfield," she whispered, "there's a girl downstairs asking if she can speak to the lady who saved the company." I stood up slowly. Bao stretched beneath my desk, tail thumping once. I didn't know who the girl was, but I had a feeling she was about to change everything. The girl from the lobby was 19, nervous, holding a wrinkled folder, eyes darting like a bird, unsure if it could land. Her name was Angela, a scholarship applicant rejected twice for lack of polish. She had come hoping someone, anyone, would give her a second look. "They said you'd understand," she whispered, voice breaking. I offered her a chair, poured her a cup of tea, and said the words I once needed to hear myself. "Start from the beginning. I'm listening." Angela wasn't the only one. Over the next few months, interns, part-timers, even security guards came by my office after hours. Some needed help with visas. Others just wanted someone to read over a college application. I never advertised it, never turned anyone away. I called it my quiet hour. From 6 to 7, when the suits went home and the building exhaled, Bao stayed curled at my feet during those moments, like he knew it was sacred time. I asked HR to create a pilot program for underrepresented voices in leadership tracks. They said it wasn't in the budget. I offered to fund the first year myself. "You're serious?" one manager asked. "You'd put your own money into this?" I looked him in the eye and said, "I scrubbed bathrooms for 30 years. I think I've earned the right to decide where my money goes." That ended the conversation. 2 weeks later, the program had a name, the Bao Initiative. I never expected a plaque, but they gave me one anyway, for building what no one saw coming. It sat on my shelf, beside June's memory box, next to a photograph of us at the zoo, he on my shoulders, Bao in a sling across my chest, like a baby kangaroo. I never stopped missing them, but I started feeling them differently, less like wounds, more like roots, like everything I was building was because of them, not despite their absence. And still, I remained the same Evelyn. I brought my lunch from home. I drank tea from my chipped daisy mug. I wore the same cardigan Jun bought for me that day at the thrift store. People started calling me Ms. Mayfield in meetings, but I always smiled and said, "Just Evelyn is fine," because I knew something most of them hadn't learned yet, that titles fade, but kindness echoes. Then one Tuesday morning I opened my inbox and saw something that made my breath catch. A reporter from Business Week wanted to feature me in a cover story. From janitor to international leader, the woman who saved Halbridge. I didn't answer right away, but I knew who would be reading it. And in a quiet apartment across town, I imagined Rebecca holding that magazine with shaking hands, reading my name under bold letters she never thought I'd earn. I didn't go out and buy a new wardrobe after the article. I didn't change my walk, or sit any taller than I already did. But I did notice people watching me differently, pausing when I spoke, listening when I didn't. One afternoon as I walked past the main lobby, I caught a reflection in the glass, a tall woman in her late 60s with silver hair and a little dog in a carrier. And for a moment I didn't recognize her, because she finally looked like someone who belonged. The Business Week issue came in the mail a week later. I placed it on the kitchen counter, unopened, and let it sit there for a full day. When I finally flipped it open, I didn't read the headline. I looked straight at the photo. It was me? Yes, but not just me. It was the look in my eyes, the quiet triumph, the kind that doesn't scream, "I won," but whispers, "I never gave up." I smiled and said out loud, "You see that, John?" Bao barked softly, as if he did too. I don't know what Rebecca thought when she saw it. Maybe she tore the page out. Maybe she stared at it in disbelief. Maybe, just maybe, she realized the woman she tried to erase had simply rewritten the story. I never sent her a message, never gloated, never even mentioned her name again, because my justice didn't live in her downfall. It lived in the lives I got to lift, the doors I helped open, and the silence I had finally transformed into something louder than noise. Legacy. Some evenings I still sit by the window with my tea and June's old notebook. I trace the Mandarin characters he drew, remembering how proud he was when I finally got the tones right. "You sound just like me now, Mama," he once said, giggling. I whisper back, "That's because I carry you, baby. Every syllable, every step." Bao curls beside me, his breath warm and steady, like a heartbeat that stayed when everything else left. People ask me now how I kept going, how I stayed kind in the face of such disregard. I tell them this: sometimes the softest people are the ones who've walked through fire, barefoot. We just learn to keep our scars on the inside. My story isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who you are, even when no one else does. It's about honoring what you love and letting that love outlive the pain. And as I sit in my little office, teacup in hand, Bao on my lap, and a new intern nervously fumbling her notebook across from me, I realize this is the real victory. Not the job, not the article, but the echo, the legacy that says, I was here, I mattered, and somewhere, in the sound of my voice and the warmth of this room, my son is still alive. Some stories don't end with applause. They end in silence that feels like peace, in a look exchanged with a dog who knows your heart, in a memory that no longer screams, just whispers, "You mattered." I didn't win in the loudest way. I simply endured with love. And maybe that's the bravest ending of all. Very few people stay with a story like this all the way to the end. If you're one of them, let me know in the comments below. It means more than you know, and I'd love to hear what touched you most. And if this story moved you even just a little, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications. It helps us reach more hearts like yours. Also, tell me, where are you watching from? I'm always amazed by how far these stories travel when they're told with truth.